Hey everybody, so I'm Mike Rose. You probably know me from writing for Gamasutra and Pocket Gamer and places. I went to Tinybuild at the end of last year, so I'm now kind of helping to find developers to publish, etc. So if there are any developers who want to talk to me, you can just kind of hit me up afterwards. I'd be happy to do that. So yeah, I was asked to do an updated version of the wonderful Simon Carlos's talk back in 2009, I think it was actually. He did a talk on sort of this digital sales that you can expect on each platform. They asked me to do kind of an updated version of that, and it's been pretty interesting to kind of compare 2009 to 2015. Obviously, one of the big issues at the moment is that on a lot of the platforms, you can make a fantastic game, but then it can still not sell very well. If you, there's just so much noise, basically, especially on like the App Store and Steam at the moment. So I thought it might be quite interesting to try and work out sales for each of the platforms, see if maybe there's a platform that you hadn't considered that it might be worth porting to. A lot of the data that I'm going to be providing is public stuff that people have done, maybe in postmortems or on their websites, etc. I've also tried to dig into as many different developers as I could. I emailed like just dozens and dozens, probably like 100 different developers across all the platforms, asking them if they'd be naughty and give me sales data, because obviously the platform holders aren't particularly happy about people doing that. And I managed to get a fair amount and kind of build some ranges that I think you can expect to get. I have so much to get through, so I'm going to try and go fast. These are the platforms I'm going to be looking at: the Nintendo eShop, both the 3DS and the Wii U. PC is going to be mainly Steam. Mobile, going to be doing iOS and Android. PlayStation Network is just PS3, PS4, and Vita, because they're kind of all bundled together now. And Xbox Marketplace, I'm going to be looking at Xbox One digital sales. Omissions, I'm not going to be talking about the 360 or the PS3, mainly because if you looked last year, there weren't that many titles that were indie titles released on these platforms. And the PS3 is kind of folded into crossplay now with the PS4 and Vita, so it's a little bit difficult to know if people are actually buying games specifically for the PS3. And free-to-play as well, especially when it comes to like mobile, it's a little difficult to be able to find sales data for those games, mainly just the way it's quantified. It's a bit like I can't go, you have to have this many downloads to be able to get this much money. It doesn't really work that way. And as well, just for kind of indie devs, there's not really that much data out there. Most of the data for free-to-play is from the big giant companies who have loads of marketing budget. There is a talk tomorrow from the guys behind Crossy Road about kind of how they managed to do free-to-play so well. So if you've got the right pass, you might want to go and check that one out. So I'm just going to jump straight in. So I'll start with the Nintendo platforms. So for the Wii U, there's about 9.2 million units sold. Last year, there was about 80 titles that could be classed as indie out on the Wii U eShop, which is pretty decent, actually, especially compared to the other consoles. Prices from about $3.15. For a lot of the developers that I talked to, when they released their game, they were featured on the front page of the store, which was quite nice for them. The thing with the Wii U eShop and what a lot of developers were saying to me was that they don't have many kind of cut price, like Steam does and PlayStation. They're quite uncommon, so you can't really look for the spikes there so much. So again, this data is just from talking to developers and asking them, please give me some sales data. And these are the kind of ranges that I managed to pull out. So low end, we're talking about, if your game maybe isn't rated so highly among players and among the press, etc., and if you don't really do any marketing, and especially as well, some of the people I talked to who were in this range had only put the game on Wii U, and that was it. So yeah, if that's the kind of scenario you're in, you're looking at, seems like less than 1,000 sales. It seems like a lot of developers I talked to were kind of between 1,000 and 10,000. That was if they'd done a bit of marketing and also the game was multi-platform. It wasn't just on Wii U, so they were kind of getting the benefit of it being elsewhere in the eye. And some developers got up to about 60,000 sales. And again, those were all people who had the game on other platforms. It wasn't just a Wii U game. It was a game where it had been on another platform, and they'd then use some of the money they made from other platforms to port it to the Wii U. So a lot of developers of Wii U games said that at the beginning they had a really nice launch. Nintendo put them on the front page of the the eShop, and then once that had disappeared, it petered out very, very quickly, and now they don't really get many sales at all. That's why a lot of them were saying it would be nice if there was more opportunities for discounts. But then again, most of the developers I talked to said that it was well worth the port. They kind of said that they had success on other platforms, so then they paid someone to maybe port it. It took maybe 6 months, especially if it's a Unity game. It's considerably easier for the Wii U. And yeah, it seems like to a lot of people I talked to, it's worth the port. So if you are going to put games on other platforms, you might want to consider the Wii U if you haven't already. 3DS. So there's about 50 million units out there, which is pretty considerable. And yet there was only about 15 games that you would class as sort of indie out on the 3DS last year. I don't really know why this is. I used to write for Pocket Gamer, and I kind of covered the launch of the 3DS when I was their handheld editor. And it seemed like in the first kind of year there wasn't much, and the second year there was an explosion of people like putting stuff out on the 3DS. And now it seems to have just died down again a bit. I guess part of it is that it's actually a little bit tricky to put games on the 3DS. You've got to think, you've got the two screens, and the porting is far more difficult than on other platforms. But it might be worth considering because, as you can see, the sales aren't astronomical, but they're better than the Wii U. So you're looking at about 5,000 sales or less if you kind of do no marketing and you have a game that's not exactly highly rated. You can get about up to 50,000 sales is what people seem to be getting a lot of the time. That's if you are kind of getting good exposure. You're getting, on the kind of front page of the 3DS eShop, and it's, again, multi-platform is useful because it brings it into the public eye a bit more. And then some games are getting up to 200,000 if Nintendo were kind of providing a lot of exposure to the game. So yeah, I mean, the other thing that people were saying as well is that it provides, the 3DS in comparison to the Wii U, it seems to provide a longer-term sales tail. So instead of just dropping off like the Wii U does, it seems to continue to provide sales. A lot of people as well were saying that they got other companies, outside companies, to make Japanese versions of the game, to port it over for there. And everybody I talked to said that was exceeding expectations for them. So it seems like the one platform, which is pretty good for that. But again, it was mentioned a lot that porting to the 3DS is pretty costly and a bit of a nightmare sometimes. So it's a kind of weighing it up. Is it worth doing it for these kind of sales? So PC then. So I'm mainly going to be talking about Steam because that's basically PC, right? So there's over 125 million active accounts at the moment, which is kind of amazing. And there's over 4,500 games on Steam, and a big portion of those, as I'm sure you're aware, have been coming in recently. So nearly 2,000 of those appeared just in 2014 alone. And this year, I've estimated that around about 2,500 will appear on Steam. So that's about 7 a day. So if you release on Steam, then you are competing. Well, you maybe not competing as such, but you know that there are at least a handful of other games that are going to be possibly taking up the press as well on that day. Of course, with Steam, one of the big pulls there is that they have a whole bunch of sales, like the summer sales and the winter sales and Halloween sales and sales for any time of the year. And the spikes that occur from those sales are, in a lot of cases, higher than the spikes that happen at launch. This is kind of the main platform that does that. I guess PlayStation have started doing it a little bit as well. But yeah, that's one of the big pulls for Steam, of course. So on Steam, if you just do no marketing and you're complete unknown and the game doesn't rate very highly, you can still expect, sort of thousands of sales, which, is pretty decent when you think about it. And then it starts to ramp up a lot depending on how much exposure you start to get. So people I talked to who kind of got a little bit of press and YouTuber exposure and, decent reviews of their games were seeing up to 100,000 sales. And then, of course, when you get up to the high end, if your game, a lot of it is getting lucky, of course, but a lot of the games that are kind of popular genres, so you've seen like DayZ and Rust, and then zombie games, put zombies in your game, then hooray. And as well, if you're getting big with YouTubers and with Twitch streamers, then you can possibly get up to 3 million sales. Probably not going to happen, but we can dream. Yeah, this is probably PC seems to be, as I'm sure you're aware, the biggest platform in terms of getting the biggest sales, or the possibility of the biggest sales. But of course, there's a ton of noise. Not as much as mobile, as we're going to find out, but yeah, there's still a lot of noise. The great things about being on PC, though, is that you can extend the life of the game through various ways. So being bundled, for example, there's a bunch of different bundle websites now. Obviously, Humble Bundle's the biggest. And if you can, a year after the game has been released, get into a Humble Bundle, you can get a lovely spike there. And it's not just the sales, right? It's suddenly there's hundreds of thousands of new people playing your game. Again, as I mentioned, the Steam sales, pretty nice for little sales spikes during the life of your game. And of course, PC is the only one right now that offers early access. I guess you could argue that you could do it on mobile as well. But you can be in a position where if you can't actually fund the whole development of your game, and if it's a specific genre or a specific type of game that would work with early access, that's a possibility for you. When we're talking about good old games, Humble, putting your games onto those platforms as well, it seems like from all the people I talked to, those will make up about 10% of your sales compared to Steam. So it might be worth putting on those platforms because 10% of a large chunk is not to be sniffed at. Mobile then. So on iOS specifically, there's now 800 million devices, 130 million new people started using iOS in 2014, so there's a lot of people there to potentially sell your game to. There's 1.4 million apps on iOS, that's apps and games, and 1.2 on Google Play. We're talking just games specifically. It seems like around about 500 games a day are put on iOS and 200 a day on Android, so there's a lot. Of course, a lot of those will just never get noticed, and so it's not like you're really competing with all of those. But of course, if you appear on Steam or something, you're at least appearing in a new releases list. On mobile, you're just not appearing anyway. You have to make that happen yourself. Android, it is rapidly growing, and I think that it's meant to kind of surpass iOS at some point this year. But everybody I talked to said that iOS is still contributing the highest percentage of their sales compared to Android. We're talking, it seemed like it was about 65% to 35%. Because I guess, of course, one of the problems with Android is you've still got the piracy going on, which is really affecting some people. So the sales figures really kind of skew quite a lot here. So the low end, a lot of people I was talking to were saying they were sort of getting less than 2,000 sales. That was if they just weren't getting any exposure and if they just didn't really get anywhere with talking to Apple or Google. If you manage to get a feature on the front page with Apple or Google, and you're getting a nice bit of exposure as well, you can, using Touch Arcade forums and maybe a bit from the press, then you can kind of expect somewhere up to about 30,000. It's easier said than done, of course. Like I say, there's hundreds of games releasing every day. The chance that Apple or Google choose your game to feature when they maybe feature a handful every week is pretty slim. So you really need to early into the life of your development to try and start a dialogue with them. And then, of course, we've seen the giant successes on iOS and Android. If you get like a nice big push from Apple and they're really kind of using your game to sell that platform, you can expect millions. But you can probably count the number of giant successes on mobile on two hands, right? Just from the last year. It seems quite difficult to have giant successes on mobile. Of course, the other thing to think about on mobile as well is that the price point is regularly lower than on other platforms. So even if you're selling lots more on mobile, if the game is on PC, the price point may be 2 or 3 times as much as on mobile, and so you don't need as many sales. So that is something that you really need to consider. And as well on mobile, most of the people I talk to, and I think it's just a given that one thing you're meant to do is kind of give constant attention to your app. So you're meant to do updates and content packs, price drops, all that kind of stuff, which is why it's really worth starting at a higher price point because you've actually got somewhere to drop it to then, which is kind of important, really. And with the Amazon App Store, I was asking people how much percent of their sales did it make up of Android sales. Seemed like it was about less than 10%. So again, just like with Good Old Games and Humble Bundle, might be worth it, may not be. So Xbox One, this was the most difficult to try and get sales figures for because since the Xbox One has launched, there's not been that many indie titles for it. It seemed like there was about 20 from when I was having a look. We also don't know how many Xbox Ones there are yet because Microsoft have said that they've shipped 10 million and they haven't kind of updated that since then. So that's a little bit tricky, but you'd assume they'd maybe have sold more over Christmas. So hopefully we'll see an updated figure there. And of course, there's the parity clause as well, which is putting some devs off, whereby if you're releasing your game on Xbox One and it's already been on PlayStation, the chances are they're just not going to take it. They've cut corners to some people, but yeah, it seems to be putting a lot of people off. So sales figures, I managed to pull a handful, which kind of gave me a general idea of how many you can expect. Seems like the ones that are a little more poorly rated and didn't really get much marketing, maybe didn't get on the dashboard of the Xbox, are getting up to about 5,000 sales. And then the kind of mid-tier is up to about 20,000 sales. If you do get on the dashboard and you're getting a little bit of exposure. I can't really put a ceiling on it because I didn't really talk to anybody who had a bunch of sales, but that isn't to say that you can't. I mean, we are actually going to be putting games on Xbox One first later this year, so we're going to find out hopefully what high end is. Yeah, the fact is that there's just not enough sales data out there yet. It's still very early days for Xbox One in terms of accommodating smaller digital games. So we're just basically just going to have to wait and see what happens this year. PlayStation in comparison, there's 19 million out there now because they had ridiculous sales over Christmas somehow. There's about 60 games that you might class as indie in 2014. And of course, there's some nice benefits on going with PlayStation. You've got the cross-buy stuff, so you can put your game on PS4 and PS Plus, and PS Vita, and people can buy once and play across both of them. And of course, you've got PS Plus as well, which I'll talk about in a moment. So sales figures on PlayStation seem to be kind of higher than Xbox One. Not much higher. So we're talking, if you don't do much marketing and you have a slightly poorly rated game, then it's in the thousands. Getting a bit of exposure from PlayStation, having decent sales, decent ratings, then you're talking up to about in the tens of thousands. And then there's a possibility of going all the way up to sort of the 200,000 mark. If you get nice pushes from PlayStation, you're getting multiple price drops when they're doing their little sales as well. The interesting thing is that all those numbers that you just saw were kind of 2014 numbers. And obviously over Christmas, they sold way more PlayStation 4s. So the possibility is that those figures you just saw were wrong, and it's going to be all doubled now. I have no idea. Again, we're going to have to see what happens. But when it comes to PS Plus, there's some fun things you can do. So a lot of people I talked to who launched on PS Plus, so they launched for free and millions of people downloaded their games. The interesting thing there is that Sony will give you a chunk of money, and they'll kind of say, right, this is probably what you would have made if you just sold it regularly. So here, have this chunk of money, and we want to make your game free to begin with. And that can be really useful, if you think, yeah, that's probably how much money we were going to make anyway, and if we go on PS Plus, then we're making Sony happy, which is useful for the future, and also we're having millions of people play our game instead of the thousands of people who are going to play it. That can be a really useful avenue to go down. PS Plus can be useful as well, just for, your game has been out 6 months, a year, or whatever, and you can then, you can think, well, I can now stick it on PS Plus and get the millions of downloads, and then people are going to then maybe hear about the next game I'm making. So, yeah, that can be a useful avenue to go down. And again, PlayStation have started doing their price drops. They've maybe started to copy Steam a bit, but it's really useful for everybody involved, I think. So that's always a good place to go as well. So wrap up really, Wii U, if you haven't considered it before, you may want to do because it seems like it might be worth it, especially if you have a bit of success on another platform. 3DS, there's also lots of sales to be had there, but it's a little bit more tricky to actually port your game to 3DS. So it's worth looking into though. Mobile is super risky, as I'm sure you all know, but it can give you a big success if you manage to tick lots of boxes and get a little bit lucky. And the kind of next-gen consoles, I don't know if we call them that anymore, but they are going to be interesting to watch this year, especially Xbox One, just to see how the kind of tide sways there. But it looks like right now PlayStation is possibly the one where you're going to get the higher sales, really, and the higher exposure. So yeah, I've been talking all about sales. Normally, I talk a lot about the actual marketing side. So things that you can do if you want to try and not be in the low tier and go into the mid, maybe the high tier. I have done some talks previously. The top two are written versions of the talks on Gamasutra. I'm also giving a talk on Wednesday about YouTubers and Twitch streamers. I've been collecting loads of data on those and loads of contacts as well, and I'm just going to give it all to you because why not? So if you want to come and see that and you've got the right badge or whatever, then yeah, please come and do that. And yeah, that's about it. So thanks very much for listening.